The Maurys, my father's side of the family, currently live in America and have lived here for many generations. However, like most families that currently live in America, this side of my family did not always live here. As hinted by our last name, my family originated from France. But how did we come to live here? The story of my family's immigration to America is one that begins in the era when Louis XIV was king. In 1685, Louis XIV passed the Edict of Fontainebleau, which made the religion of Protestantism illegal. As a result, both the Maury and Fontaine families, who were Huguenots, fled France to escape prosecution. Fast forward to October 20th, 1716. Mary Ann Fontaine and Matthew Maury were married together in Dublin, Ireland, connecting the Maury and Fontaine families. After their marriage, Matthew sailed to Virginia and arrived in March 1718, settling on a portion of land. While here, he would make plans to construct a small house before traveling back to Dublin to pick up his wife and infant son, James Maury, later known as Reverend James Maury. After Matthew arrived back, he would make the trip back to Virginia shortly after, this time accompanied by his wife and son. James Maury, who was born on April 8, 1717, would go on to attend William and Mary College, and in 1742 would travel to England to be ordained as a minister, receiving the title of Reverend. The following year, on November 11th, he married Mary Walker. Later on in his life, he would become the founder of the Maurys School for Boys, more commonly known as the Maurys School. He focused mainly on teaching classics, manners, morals, mathematics, literature, history, geography, Latin, and Greek. In this school, he tutored 3 future presidents and 5 future Declaration of Independence signers. The presidents which he taught were Thomas Jefferson, James Madison, and James Monroe. Out of these 3 presidents, Jefferson seemed to be James Maury's favorite. This was most likely the case due to Jefferson living with Reverend James Maury and his family in their house for 2 years during his time at Maurys School. However, it is more likely for this to be true due to the fact that Jefferson was best friends with Reverend James Maury's son, James Maury. James Maury and Jefferson's friendship continued to grow as they each grew older, and they remained good friends throughout their lives. We know this to be the case due to the frequency of letters sent between the two, as well as from how they talked to each other through them. There is one particular letter, though, that makes this very clear. It is a letter sent from Maury to Jefferson. The perusal of this letter affected me exceedingly. And indeed, how could it be otherwise, since it's so flattering, a testimony of that friendship you have invariably strewn for me from so early a period, and brings to my mind the most pleasing recollections. I pray you, sir, to accept my best thanks for these kind attentions, as I do for the good account you give me of my worthy brother, for whom I had long been alarmed. Reverend James Maury died June 9, 1769, at the age of 52. Before he died, however, he had a total of 13 children, and as such had many grandchildren. One of these grandchildren was Matthew Fontaine Maury. Matthew Fontaine Maury, known as the Pathfinder of the Sea, was an important figure within the history of America. He was born January 14, 1806. Matthew would enter the Navy as a midshipman in 1825 at the age of 19. Almost immediately, he would start to study the sea and record methods of navigation, impressing both his superiors and fellow cadets. He would continue to go on several naval expeditions and write many articles and books about oceanography and navigation. In August 1839, he would decide to take some time to spend at his home in Fredericksburg. However, 3 months after this decision, he would be involved in a stagecoach accident that severely dislocated his right knee joint and fractured his right thigh bone. Due to his injury, Matthew Fontaine Maury had to take a break from naval voyaging, and so he decided to focus entirely on the scientific aspect of his naval profession. This would then lead to the publication of several great articles. Matthew Fontaine Maury would also go on to present many ideas in order to reform the Navy, many of which were effected immediately and eventually adopted. All this hard work would eventually pay off, and Maury would become the superintendent of the Naval Observatory and head of the Depot of Charts and Instruments. During this time, he would study the logs and charts of thousands of ships, and, using this data, would publish his book, The Wind and Current Chart of the North Atlantic. This book would show sailors how to efficiently travel the ocean by using ocean currents and winds to their advantage. Thanks to Maurys oceanography data, navies and marines from all around the world were able to develop charts for all the major trade routes, making the distribution of goods both safer and more efficient. When the Civil War eventually began, Maury would resign from the Navy and join the Confederacy. Throughout the war, he would spend his time aiding the Confederacy by acquiring a large number of ships for them. Matthew Fontaine Maury would die in 1873 in his home at the age of 67. As a result of his accomplishments, he would have a school named after him, as well as have a statue dedicated to him. The statue has since been vandalized and removed due to his owning of slaves, but the school still stands to this day. With all this being said, I hope that you've enjoyed my project. I found it quite interesting being able to dive into and learn about the lives and history of these past members of my family. Thank you for listening and watching my digital story.